Greetings. High-level statements of the perspective of analytical sociology often make strong claims about how sociological research must proceed. I'd like to give a road test to that claim with a challenging test case. I'd like to ask whether the messy, complex social and individual events of contentious politics can be adequately handled from the perspective of analytical sociology. And for my working analysis today, I'll look at Doug McAdam's treatment of the civil rights movement in order to consider how it meshes with the Analytical Sociology Manifesto. What is the manifesto? I think we're all familiar with it. This is taken from the Hedstrom and Ilikoski version of it. First, that any good sociological account must provide explanations of social outcomes based on a description of the mechanisms that give rise to those outcomes. Secondly, mechanisms need to be identified at the level of the actors who make up those outcomes. Third, the researcher should always strive for realism in assumptions about mechanisms, hypotheses about social processes, and so forth. Fourth, analytical sociology should be pluralistic about the theories of the actor which it makes use of, not be constrained simply to rational choice models or other narrow economic rationality models of actor decision-making. And fifth, explanations should always take the form of an ascending explanation from individuals to social outcomes. So the test case that I have in mind is contentious politics. And this topic might seem to be an ideal subject for treatment by the methods of analytical sociology, because it is superficially plausible that we could account for a great deal of the phenomena of riots, rebellion, civil wars by building upwards from the grievances that exist among actors, the political incentives of political actors, and then the processes of aggregation through which these motivations lead to collective action. Doug McAdam treats the US civil rights movement in his book, Political Process and the Development of Black Insurgency, and his model of explanation does not take that structure. McAdam notes the significant increase in civil rights activism in the 1950s American South and its rapid spread to new locations. Jim Crow segregation and repression were suddenly the object of organized resistance across the South. This was a complex and decentralized process with multiple actors and local populations who were involved. There were the Black churches, the civil rights organizations, multiple influential leaders in many different places. There were local activist groups in different cities organizing around specific issues. And of course, there were millions of ordinary Black people who were expressing their grievances and joining in demonstrations. The three large causal factors which Doug McAdam emphasizes and kind of organizes his analysis around include these. First, successful contentious action, collective action, is most likely in a time of expanding political opportunities. Second, in order for contentious politics to succeed, there need to be existing mobilizing structures, including organizations. And third, turning to the actor, there is a recognition on Doug McAdam's part that actors are not static, fixed, once and for all individuals. Instead, they are meaning-bearing agents. Topics and issues and grievances need to be framed. They need to arrive at their own meanings to attribute to the circumstances they find themselves in. So expanding political opportunities, existing mobilizing structures, and the processes of framing and meaning creation. These are the three main ideas. So the question for me is whether McAdam's method of analysis of the civil rights movement can be reconciled with the Analytical Sociology Manifesto. And I'm inclined to what is, for me anyway, kind of a surprising conclusion. It is the possibility that almost all of McAdam's key theoretical statements and his analytical statements and the methodology that he pursues can be reformulated in analytical sociology terms. So we might think McAdam was perhaps an analytical sociologist before his time. And it turns out that that is almost true, but with important provisos, which are of interest to analytical sociologists. So first, the points of compatibility. When you read through McAdam's book, you're really struck by how clear his exposition is. He has a knack for stating both what was happening on the ground and his own interpretation of the causal factors leading to those results. Secondly, he makes extensive use of available evidence, both macro evidence, statistical evidence, quantitative and qualitative evidence. Third, he is realistic about the assumptions and descriptions that he puts forward of the social processes involved. As a historical sociologist, he is committed to the idea of providing realistic descriptions. Fourth, he is committed to providing an account of mechanisms leading to the outcomes of interest. This is a shared commitment with other historical sociologists like Chuck Tilley, but their view of explanation is entirely focused on the idea of providing accounts of the mechanisms and processes. And finally, there is a substantial attention given throughout this book to the circumstances and actions of individual actors within the movement. So this, too, is shared with analytical sociology. So what about points of incompatibility and tension? McAdam, and this is the most important point of incompatibility, I would say, McAdam gives explanatory importance to dynamic meso-level entities in the explanations that he offers. In particular, he highlights the role that organizations played in facilitating and shaping contentious action throughout the South, and that we cannot explain the development of collective action without referring to these organizations. A second point of divergence is that McAdam has a somewhat different view of the actor that he puts forward a relational and dynamic conception of the actor. The actor's intentionality and beliefs and so forth are not fixed throughout the process. Instead, they change their ideas and aspirations and grievances and definition of their situation through the relationships that they have with other actors and with organizations. And then third, a point that I can't argue for here today, but have argued for elsewhere, there are no plausible agent-based models of contention that have anything like the explanatory plausibility of McAdam's multi-level approach. ABM approaches to social contention have not proven to be very illuminating. So let's look at meso-level organizations for a second, but this plays an absolutely critical role in McAdam's book. Organizations like the Council on Racial Equality, the NAACP, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and so forth, and the networks of activists and lower-level leaders that they drew around them in different social locations. These organizations play key causal roles in the account that McAdam offers throughout the South. These organizations, furthermore, changed dynamically through the course of the civil rights movement. And they were located at different levels, some national, some regional, and some local. So the social movement, the civil rights movement that McAdam describes, cannot be analyzed in a way that ignores the activity and coordinating capabilities of organizations like these. You can't make his arguments without making essential reference to these kinds of dynamic organizations of civil right activism. These organizations, furthermore, cannot be treated as fixed and unchanging conditions. They cannot be exogenized. Instead, they are dynamic parts of the process. So McAdam disagrees with the idea that causal mechanisms exist only at the micro level. But this is a bedrock assumption for people like Hedstrom, Gianluca, De Molinari, and Bierman. Crucial to McAdam's view is that dynamic organizations are essential to understanding the civil rights movement. Grievances at the individual level are not sufficient. But analytical sociology has a hard time incorporating organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee or the Black Church into explanations of activism and mobilization. This leads me to an important conclusion that the this finding about organizations requires abandoning the view that mechanisms exist only at the micro level. That core belief of analytical sociology is no longer adequate. Turn now to the relational theory of the actor. McAdam's account of individual actors is admittedly sketchy, but it seems clear that his perspective does not attempt to explain mobilization simply as the aggregation of isolated, fixed individual actors. Instead, he favors the relational actor theory, the idea that individuals develop through the struggles, through the periods of activity that they are engaged in. They make decisions about action and inaction in part through the ongoing relationships they have with other individuals, neighbors, co-workers, other people on the bus. The actor's motivations, beliefs, and mental frameworks take shape in relation to those of other actors, and they continue to change as a result of interaction. This is much harder to model, but it is more realistic. And again, it's a lesson which I think analytical sociology ought to pay attention to. There are promising approaches to social movements and contentious politics within analytical sociology, but there's still a lot of progress that needs to be made. Stathis Kalavas has attempted to provide an analysis of the mechanisms through which individuals are brought to support group violence. But the only reference here in this account is reference to organizations. The only reference to organizations is to political parties, and these are treated statically and exogenously. Second example, Roberto Fangiosi offers a causal theory of the temporal and spatial patterns of lynchings in the American South. And this account conforms to the AS framework, and it is a creative approach to empirical explanation of the pattern of lynching. But this account also addresses only the question of individual motivation of perpetrators. Neither essay provides a basis for understanding the broad mass movements that McAdam considers within the civil rights movement. Delia Baldassarri provides the most developed treatment of group political action within analytical sociology. Her approach gives primary attention to the motivations of individual participants. She comes out of the collective action problem framework, but she provides good descriptions of key ideas from the contentious politics literature. She pays attention also to the processes leading to group identity and shared interest formation, the kind of symbolic and meaningful part of the formation of the action orientation of the individuals. She acknowledges the causal importance of social networks, as indeed all or almost all analytical sociologists do, within the process of group identity formation. However, the account does not offer a convincing description of the workings of organizations in the creation of collective action. And her account remains excessively bound to the bottom-up or aggregative model of explanation and causal influence. So what's the scorecard? How'd the test come out? In most respects, I would say that McAdam's treatment of the civil rights movement is compatible with analytical sociology desiderata of good sociology research. Analytical sociology must confront the reality of Meso-level structures and causal mechanisms. And in particular, analytical sociology needs a much more nuanced and dynamic theory of organizations. Further, analytical sociology should welcome even greater pluralism on the subject of the features of the actor who are involved in collective action and social movements. And finally, analytical sociology should abandon the dogmatic requirement that only ascending explanatory arguments from individual to macro outcome are acceptable. I think that McAdam's book demonstrates the utility of a mixed level analysis where meso-level entities like organizations play a causal role. So thank you.